So hi everyone, it's a pleasure to have you all on board. So just as a first note, if you want to turn on your cameras, that would be great. It's always a pleasure to see you. Be aware that we are recording it and that with being here and turning on your camera, you give your permission to it being recorded, because we will also use it for the next round of the course, where other people might then be watching it. So we hope that anyone else who wants to join, we will let people in. So a pleasure to see all of you. Hi, Linda, nice to see you. Hi, Sarah. It's nice to actually put a face to some of the conversations and exchanges that we've had on the on Sketch Drive and in the discussion board. So great to have you all here. What we would like to do today is first give you a bit more of an overview of what has happened during the last 5 weeks and why we thought what we did made sense. And so I, in general, come back to what we have learned, or what we hope that we have learned together. Then give you a little bit of some insights on the 2 case studies that Gül and Tianchen and Kai have been taking you throughout the course to see if they can add some more ideas. Hilde will say a bit more about how to connect text and images, also in view of the upcoming final project. And then we'll also have time for answering a couple of questions that have been posted, and have a discussion with all of you if you're interested and if you have thoughts. If you already have some questions, do feel free to put them in the chat right away. That way we can start thinking about it, and we also know that you want to engage, because I mean, that's ideally, that's the most intriguing part, to be able to actually exchange concrete thoughts among ourselves. So the way that we set up the course and developed it is to bring together 2 fields that are usually disconnected. Water is an important field. It's one of the SDGs. Everybody knows how important it is, and there's lots of people who work to make our future water safe. But that is usually a very forward-looking, fast-acting, often technology-based field. And on the other hand, we have heritage. And this heritage has been, or the sector of heritage is usually one that is long-term, relatively slow moving, and you're looking at the object rather than looking at networks. So the idea behind this entire course is, how can we bridge between the fields of water and heritage? And that also meant for us understanding what heritage actually is and what the difference is with history. So with that in mind, we developed the course to bring you in week by week to the first, starting with the idea also for heritage specialists that water is a system. And this may seem very basic and high school level, yet I think most people are not aware of it. So we asked you to share your water works, to think about what these water works mean in everyday practices, in culture, but also in words. It's maybe not surprising to get this concept of the cloud with life. Water is life. It sounds so basic, and yet it's probably the most important and the most striking part of all of these conversations. Water is also transport, and we see it connected to drinking and energy and agriculture through rivers and irrigation, for example. And it's fascinating to see all these little droplets, as Hilde once called them, around this larger field of life that they are contributing to. And I hope that this image of the word cloud, heavy with meaning, also enriches your thinking about water systems. Hilde.
Yes, and we asked you to look for images and examples, idioms that kind of show how water is interwoven with our daily lives in our culture. And So you gave us a lot of idioms, which was really fun because some of them we recognized in direct translation, like het hoofd boven water houden, which is keep your head above water. I think in many languages it's the same. But also two in Spanish, that a couple in Spanish actually that were very original that we didn't know. Maybe Carla, you can click once more so we can see the translations in English. So don't get involved in things that aren't your business. If you don't drink the water, and let it stream. Water that's already been passed doesn't move mills, which also had a really nice photograph of a water mill in Chile. And of course, it kind of connects to the course because we actually think that the water that has passed does move mills. This is also really nice because it has a lot of, it's chock full with meaning. It's the water god Hapi in Egypt. It shows him connecting the two sides of the Nile, but also the upper and the underworld. It is used in a kind of harvest festival, if I'm not mistaken. If anyone knows better, then please just speak up and correct me. But it really shows how water plays a big role in religion and sense making as well. These festivals had these poems that the Nile comes from the darkness. It irrigates. It gives sustenance. It is really a matter of life and death.
Yeah, and I also was fascinated by your often beautiful drawings and the way that they highlight the water system. And often when you just walk into a courtyard, like these courtyards inspired in Spain by the Islamic inspiration that developed over time, they are effectively water systems. And the learner really picked that up nicely, from the clouds to the way that the underground is organized, how the trees are rooted in the structure. So this is exactly the kind of understanding, drawing that we were trying to get you all excited about and to realize, including the sun and the evaporation here that is captured in the image. And then in Water Under the Bridge, we tried to move further or to take it the way that Hilde just said, water that has passed the mill doesn't move or doesn't generate energy or something like that, is the same, where we kind of disagree, because we think that if you have a long-term historic understanding, then you can actually also inspire the future. So in this case, we looked, so the learner who looked at the historic city of Maybot made an important point about the Qanats, which are recognized as an important historic and heritage site, but also made a point how this is interconnected with other water infrastructures, rivers, gardens, etc., so that it is not just one thing that has to be preserved, but that we are talking about a much more complex system. Kayi, did you want to add something on that? Or shall I move?
Yeah, you can just move. Maybe the one important thing is that because of the opening of the host of these historic structures, the water underground are largely polluted when there's no new covering over that and when it is abandoned. And here we can see from a larger scale, in both of the case, one in China and one in UK, show that the changing riverbanks in history. So in many historic port cities resulting from modernization and industrialization, although the waterways maintain the same for their location or something else, their functions and the scales are changing. And in the discussion board, one of our students also mentioned that some new actions are really far away from the initial nature water system that understood the water canals are as complex ecosystem. So if we see the next page to a smaller scale, Carola, please help me to click.
Yes.
Okay, maybe my,
Yes.
okay, we can see that the wheels in Venice were originally essential for the city's urban planning for people's everyday life, to whose uniqueness they contribute in a fundamental way. But because in the 19th century, we see construction of new infrastructure and cities aqueducts, they were gradually abandoned as well, like what we saw in Iran. And today, if we visit the city, we can see all these kind of historic water structures are only for ornamental functions without really usage in people's daily life. So people are kindly apart from these historic structures. And as what I mentioned in the slides, we can see that because of the abandon of these historic water structures, many water courses are facing the danger to be polluted. In this sense, water purification has been seen necessary in a broader context, like treatment. Yeah. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, because I was recently talking to a friend from Venice who was complaining that tourists have no clue what these things are about and are just leaving their trash from a takeaway restaurant on top of them. And that is exactly why we need a better and more thorough understanding of these traditional practices. But let's move to the Waterfabrik, Tayi.
Yeah, like in the late 19th century, I think people started to try to find solutions to purifying water, and can be used in even broader context. The treatment for better water quality is increasingly being tackled in a context of incidental pollution, like what we say, and also the river management and the climate change we are facing and will face in the future.
Yeah. And so then we move to week 3, and which we called Fish Out of Water, to look at different stakeholders and their change over time. And for us, this was a really important part to also make clear how we move from history and historical investigation to heritage. Only, Hilde, you phrased it once very nicely. How did you say that?
That history becomes heritage through the stakeholders that kind of decide which part of history are becoming heritage.
Exactly. So there needs to be, there's a different group of people involved in history, our everyday, at a certain moment in time, everyone is part of this water system, or a specific group of people actually using this water system, what we will look at through a lens of history. Once the site becomes heritage, there are much more and very different stakeholders added, but also as these systems grow, we have much more diverse public stakeholders, water companies, etc. Stefan.
Yeah, well, that's what I liked about this specific case, is that we can see the evolution, and the fact that we can see the lines of stakeholders, merchants, workers, and what at the time were considered foreigners are basically really interconnected, and also following the lines of the water, like this authority following, like being on the how to say, on the side of the rivers and along the river, connected with merchants and also the workers was really nice. And what we can see is that in the next slide, we can see the current situation, and we can see that these lines are not connected anymore, and that the stakeholders are not necessarily talking to each other or seeing each other anymore. And additionally to that, they are not following the river anymore. The connection between themselves and between the rivers is kind of lost, and this is where there is room for improvement, because if you connect what is now not foreigners anymore but tourists to the entire city and to places of heritage along the water, then it becomes much more interesting for them.
Exactly, and I think these stakeholder maps as a tool are really important to identify who can be involved in rethinking something. You should almost think if we can realign some of these stakeholders, and it doesn't have to be all, give them the same narrative and understanding, we should be able to think about new, different, and sometimes solutions that are based on historical understanding. Now, we then went into troubled waters. Tianjen.
Yes, in the week 4 in the troubled waters, we briefly learned the challenges the historical waterworks are facing nowadays, and also we've learned the ideas of duality, that actually the opportunity and the challenges are sitting next to each other. And this also brings us to the discussion of values, that different stakeholders may share or may not share the same values. And this post I've chosen is very nicely shown how the learner has really absorbed the information that we are trying to deliver. I think the author is also in this room, so maybe Linda, you can talk to us more about the case. And I quite like also this image. Sorry, can you go back a little bit? Yeah. Yeah,
sorry.
I think this image also talks to the post that I've chosen in a previous slide. This one is about the urban map of Cairo, so you can see how dramatic change has been happening in this city in the past 200 years. We've lost so much green and blue spaces in the urban area, and the city has been expanded so dramatically. So I think this picture really speaks for itself, that we're facing great challenge nowadays.
Right,
Yeah,
and so this is also where we are calling on all of you to help us get into these uncharted waters, to use, for example, the historic urban landscape approach to bring to build heritage into its larger landscape context, to think about heritage as an opportunity for heritage and the past as an opportunity for sustainable development, and to connect that directly to principles like valuing water that have a much more financial, economic based approach, and where we need to infuse more cultural, spatial, social solutions. Good.
Maybe just, I see that Christian has to leave in a few minutes, so maybe we can skip to his question.
Yes,
Great. An idea?
Sure, I can, and I'll stop sharing for a minute. How about that? Can you repeat the question, Christian? Are you here? I don't see Christian on the screen. Oh yes, Christian, there you are. But now you're hiding, I guess, behind your beautiful image of Valparaiso. So Christian's question, it would be useful to know a case study in which water that was hidden in the underground appears again in new forms, opened for its enjoyment by citizens thinking about solutions in the lower land of the city, contemporary to the work that must be done in the upper lands on ravines. Which stakeholders were involved, how engineers understand this paradigm shift, how was it financed? Now, this is a huge question, but very important.
Sorry, Carola. I think I was mistaken. Stefan said, I don't know if I think he actually just left for a few minutes instead of left in a few minutes. Sorry, I misunderstood.
No problem. Well, then let's wait for him before we answer that question, and I go back to the sharing of the slides.
Nice cliffhanger.
But we have a number of intriguing commentators in the session too, with Karim and others. So Gül, you wanted to say something about this?
I found this case interesting because I think it overlaps with some of the discussions we had over the covering of some greeneries and some waterworks that were not discovered by the locals or tourists in the next generations to come. So I think taking out this and uncovering of green areas, putting back into the thinking of waterworks within this system is a way to sustainable management of it, because I think also with other cases that came out very often with the biodiversity, vegetation, not only the waterwork itself, but its surrounding. So yeah, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think what you're saying here is that even if you only have a small plot of land, understanding how your small plot of land features in and contributes to a larger water system, that would be great, which involves spreading the knowledge, which is what we have been trying to do through this course. But maybe we have a number of other people on board here. So before we go into discussing the other case studies a bit more, for anybody who wants to talk, maybe this is a good moment to come in. Yeah.
Yes, Kaula, I'm back. Yes, I'm working on spade irrigation. Maybe it's something not known to the people, because I just got a discussion that a question that how can we get engineers and others to embrace nature-based solution. I think that's one of the things that when I'm talking about spade irrigation, it's an indigenous old irrigation system, maybe 5,000 years back, and still it's functioning in many parts of the world without any institutional support through community, participation. In Pakistan, it has got 2 million hectare land under spade irrigation. But if you ask somebody in Pakistan what is spade irrigation, hardly academic and engineer and policy makers they know it. The reason is, which is here, have been asked that how we can convince or motivate engineers to know about these things. The simple reason is this, that these traditional irrigation systems are not part of education curricula. They are not taught at university level to agriculturists or to civil or to irrigation engineers. And then since it's not known to these people, the student, and that's why it's not known. And ultimately, it does not come into a policy. People like me who come from those remote areas where we practice these things, and we are working on that. We have written a first book on spade irrigation, published by Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations in 2010. It's accessible on internet. It's called Guidelines on Spade Irrigation. It tells you about the whole thing, that where it originates, how it works, and how it's a part of culture and history. And the other book I will also write here, it's called The Dry Side of the Indus. I will put those both names so you can download these things. And now we are working on this because it's a part of history, it's a part of community. Even in this part of the world where I come from, people put their names on the names of the rivers and the streams. So you can imagine that how important it is to the local culture and to the local community. If there's any question, I would like to answer.
Thanks, Karim. I think Sarah has a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, actually, first of all, hello and hello everyone. I'm very happy that I have this opportunity to be here. I have a question about what is the role of social perception? I mean that the memory of people through the time. I think that when government, researchers, or architects don't pay attention to water infrastructure and water heritage through the time, some memories like flooding, like water air pollution, cause a negative memory for people, and so the next generation, when they want to think about the heritage and water heritage, and they don't have a positive memory. So how we can solve it? I mean that, for example, in Iran, in Shiraz, we have a Khoshk River, and for example, in Nowruz, which is a new year for Muslim people, it actually caused many problems because the flooding caused many problems for people, and after that, people don't have a positive memory about it. So how we can change it, how we can talk to people?
Yeah, here it's like this, that it's very interesting to note that what is spate irrigation? It's basically diverting the flash floods to the fields by constructing an earthen obstacle or structure, which is a temporary, in the dry river, what's you call Khushk river, Darya Khushk, Jua Khushk, okay? And we are few people, I would say, that we think and we argue that in our case, floods, they are blessing, they are not disaster. It's very interesting that many people in this world, they think floods are, negative, and maybe they are right in their own way, but in our part, floods are blessing and opportunity. We live in a desert, and our rivers, they, discharge these floods occasionally, maybe once in a year or 2 times or 3 or 4 times a year, like that. So if you're talking about spate irrigation, it's altogether converting this disaster and negative thing into opportunity and blessing for livelihood, for people benefit.
Yeah, and I think, Sarah, your question is also broader. So how do we actually do this? I think this course is one of the ways to try and do it, because just to build on what you said before, these narratives or these stories about water and its dangers and opportunities change over time. So it may have been the flooding was a blessing, as Karim just said, in some parts of the world or in some periods. And then we build a whole narrative of resistance. No, we have to have stronger dikes, and only the stronger dikes can take us out. And often that goes hand in hand with, say, financial interventions. So the World Bank going into parts of the world saying we have to have higher dikes, we have to have this to bring a solution. And then you see that the trust of the local people is changed away from their vernacular understanding to they believe in the World Bank. So we have to not only convince people of a new narrative, but we also have to deconstruct the old narrative. And that's what we try to also do with the duality. So it's not black or white. It's not the big dam or the local. But so to try and answer your question, conceptualization of these solutions. What does the big dike deliver? Tennessee Valley Authority serving so many states in the United States is a different answer than the local. So it's part of a different cultural concept. And how do we bring this at all levels, from children's education to educating professionals, making them aware that there are specific values behind it, but that buy-in into historic solutions also means that the people themselves have to actually do something. Because I think like with the Venetian wells, unless these things are constantly cleaned up and we are willing and ready to either pay people for it or for the Kanats to have solutions for people to go into there and clean it up, it's not going to work. So it's a whole, I think if we could even conceptualize these steps from analyzing the past, understanding which values were at the origin of which decision, and then going a step further to say, so if we have new values to identify this value shift, then to say with our new values, it doesn't mean that this historic period was completely wrong, but it's not in line with the values we want today or with climate change, because we can't just build higher and higher dikes. And if we can, and that's why I'm so interested also in this long-term historical development, identifying what happened when, where, with what values, and then translating it back so that we can keep credibility. Because if you seem to be changing, or one day you say I need higher dikes, the next day you say I don't need dikes, that doesn't make sense. So to really deconstruct and reconstruct a narrative that even like engineers, we were talking in the chat about it with David, that nature-based solutions are an engineering option. It doesn't always have to mean pouring more concrete into the landscape.
I think, Kavala, maybe you can give some example of this, the famous project in Netherlands, Room for River, that how it was shifted from constructing that to giving a more room to the river, a really unique concept.
Exactly. So I'm talking in the course about it, I think in week 5. At this point, I don't remember, but the Room for the River is an idea to withdraw from, to unbuild some of the big dikes and structures that keep the river water running through the Netherlands. So over a century, they built so that the Netherlands is in a delta. All the water from the east of Europe, from Western Europe, but further east to the Netherlands, comes through the Netherlands. And there are different options. Either you say, let's get rid of this water as soon as possible and channel it through to the North Sea, or to say, let's take advantage of this water and bring it into to use it in different ways, or to say, if it floods, it's too much water anyway, and we just had the problem. Now, the Netherlands has both spatial solutions and policy-making ones. So there are options now to flood specific areas, specific agricultural areas, to unbuild some of the land that was land before, to make it possible to actually flood it. But that involves, for example, compensating owners of the agricultural land if they flood. That's less money than to pay for the rebuilding of an entire city. But it's a policy decision, because you then have to get the money from the city dwellers, or from the cities, to actually compensate the farmers whose land will be ravaged, even though they could have built a higher dam themselves. So that's in the case of Germany, it's very separated. In the case of the Netherlands, it's much more complex system. And so this change I can put the link in the chat also for the whole project. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. And but when we have some case studies that for example, we haven't a room for river, which you explain it. You think what we should to aware people about the value of water, what we should do to help people, to help them to know about the value of water and participate in the projects.
And it might actually be interesting for you also to talk with Masoud Gader, so another learner who is in the course. Maybe look up who else is working on Kanats. This whole integration of this system, and what I think is important is also to understand the temporality of it, so that right now we're thinking about architecture as a fixed structure that should always be there. But maybe there are architecture structures that should be there for 3 months or 10 months, but that have to be taken out whenever the floods arrive. That's one other way, I think, of reconnecting. And so you can go step by step. You probably have to have changes in taxation. You have to have changes in legislation. You have to have different values we already discussed, but you even have to have different zoning or planning tools, for example, to make multifunctional uses possible. Because it could be that you allow for use at one point of the day and not at night, or in one season and not in another season. But that's not something that we are used to. I mean, just think of the food we eat. We are so much used to being able to eat, I don't know, in this country, strawberries all the year, which doesn't make any sense because they don't grow in our gardens, right? So it requires a lot of water. And so that's where I'm talking more about changing everyday practices. But maybe someone else also has an idea how to answer Sarah's question.
Well, for me, I would be curious to have the opinion of Linda, if possible, because as you explained in your brief description, Linda, you said that you were formed in public administration and history, and you never really touched upon waterworks or water systems. So what did you think? Why were you interested in the end in taking such a course, and what did it mean to you?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about joining a water board, and that's more that I wanted to do something for a political party, and there's a training for joining the provincial states or the water boards. So that's actually the first time I came into touch with it. And I'm a former colleague of Hilde, and she posted the course on LinkedIn, and I thought, well, this is such a good match. I like to follow the course, and actually I really like it because, like I said in the chat, it's really something also as a tourist, for example, if you go somewhere and you look at the waterworks, you can really have another view on the environment. And also when looking for all the pictures and looking at the rights which were on the pictures or how to deal with that, I was feeling sorry that I didn't take more pictures of waterworks before, because I think it's a really nice topic. Yeah, and I also convinced my husband to follow the course, so he's also in the course. And it's nice to do this together because we really have a different background. He has a more technical background, so he is surprised about, it's not only about my water work, but also about all the stakeholders around it. So for me, that's much more common to my background, I think. But yeah, now that I think about it, or that I said it in the chat, actually, I did study history, and it was never a topic, I think, to look at water. And also in a public administration education, it's also not a topic which, yeah, could be very interesting, I think. And a case study for things as network analysis or that kind of thing.
Yeah. David, did you want to add something in? I see you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Otherwise, maybe see if you can get your sound. Maybe because I was thinking this topic also relates directly to Christian's question. And Christian, we already read out your question while you were away, so I think everybody remembers it. But maybe, yes, David will type in his question. So let's just move to Christian and then come back to David. Christian, you asked about other examples of uncovering rivers, or at least that's the short version of what I got out of it. And you have very specific questions, and this will be a nice research project. To start with, what I was thinking about, there are a number of examples like I cannot pronounce this Korean river, Cheon River, which ran through Seoul, was covered up and then returned into but you know that example, right? What is interesting, in terms we had, and it's actually a Dutch office, MVADV, who was behind this. It's interesting to look in that. I had a couple of students writing student papers on it, and questions of social justice do not seem to have been particularly incorporated in the design. So whenever you look at these examples, that's something to take into account too. I thought of the examples of Brussels. So Brussels covered up its river Seine, like the river, almost the same as the Parisian Seine, but S-E-N-N-E spelled, already in the, I believe, late 19th century to build its boulevards. And I think the Brussels case may be interesting for you because it has so much become part over 100 years of the regular landscape that they're only now starting to take out the boulevards again, trying to bring in a bit of water. So that could be a good example to look in. And even the case of Delft, which is obviously much smaller, and it's about artificial canals. But Delft had canals surrounding the city, which were then covered up with a railway track. And most recently, they've taken the railway track down and put in, well, they haven't really brought the water back, but they have brought a, like water basins back that remind people actually of the water. And then there's parking garages underneath. So those could be examples, and we keep on collecting. As anybody else has examples of rivers, ideally ravines, that have been uncovered to bring them back. I'm wondering, actually was one more example, which I showed in the course on the river in Kobe. So I think you might actually benefit from Japanese examples because they have very fast running rivers that were bordered up with concrete. And there are all kinds of initiatives of bringing these back in much more nature-shaped ways, also because of the problem of landslides. Anyone else has examples on this?
I mean, my hometown is more trying to bring the canals back, but it's so much, when you get used to not having the water and that you covered it up, then it's so difficult for the people, the inhabitants, but also the authorities, because it's asking for a lot of money to bring them back again and imagine the city with rivers and waters again.
Yeah, so you didn't say the name of your hometown, which is Lille. So that would help. But
yeah,
I think,
exactly.
I happen to know. But I think it's important also to look at temporary solutions. So when you think of Paris Beach, so the city of Paris, only in the months of August for several years, covered the inner city highways with sand. And they just closed down the inner city highways where most of the Parisians were on vacation anyway. But that became so much of an attraction. And the fact of playing beach volley next to the Seine River, having, I don't know, your leaning chair along sunbathing next to the Seine River. So imagining these kinds of temporary solutions as a driver for long-term change. I really believe that this is not uncovering the river, but in some ways it's rediscovering the river, which may be a first step to uncovering it. But I'm happy to keep on talking about this. David, hi, there's new people joining. But David writes in the chat, here in St. Andrews on Market Wharf, people feel that the town and the economic interests have stolen the wharf from them. So the question, I think, is also, you had it phrased a bit differently in the question that you sent in. I just have to find it here. Hold on. If anybody has it in front of them, tell me. Oh, so your question was, do all the stakeholders have to be involved? Or is there a way to regain some of dynamic by direct action? So your question is if you could get permission to open a fish market, perhaps one day a week, to retake some of that space for public use, which is now dominated by other stakeholders, such as parking for the pleasure boaters, fuel trucks for the tour boat operators, so that this is a specific example how to use the space in a traditional function and raise awareness about the bio-nature of the water and the sea. So maybe other learners, anyone else on the call also has an idea on how to exactly do it. And Christian, maybe you have also concrete experience with stakeholder discussions. Maybe you also want to respond on that. So how to make, so in some ways it goes back also to Sarah's question, how to now a water space is occupied, owned by a specific group of actors that are not sustainable. What kind of action can we imagine, even like a temporary market use, to give access to a different group of stakeholders? I think that's really what David's question is about. Any thoughts?
Well, I think that nowadays there are initiatives like design competition, for example, I've seen, and especially in port city areas, and where they ask public opinion and public chooses their own design in a way according to their needs, and this is in a way a start to involve their needs and what they want to do with their water works. So I think if this gets more and more accessible, like these competitions at the moment at a national level, but maybe regional or local initiatives support this kind of can be design oriented or could be some other projects, then I think there is a way to move forward in including the public in the decision making.
And I think even thinking back of, say, the 60s and the 70s in the Netherlands, for example, having a street party and blocking a street can be the first step. So temporary actions can be the first step to change people's behaviors. I think it was the mayor of, I forget, in one city, he changed completely the routing of traffic. And in the morning, he was telling he got really mad calls from parents saying, I couldn't drive my kid to school. And then in the afternoon, the whole story changed because these kids now came home having driven by bike to school and were really excited that they finally were on their own and that they had a safe street to drive over. And I really thought that was such a great example, because a politician making a clear cut and getting new stakeholders on board. So switching from listening to the parents to effectively listening to the kids via their parents. So your idea of proposing a one-day fish market, I think it's a really good one. Or this, or a street party. There are examples from the Ruhrgebiet where they closed one huge highway that runs through Europe on I forget, let's say 100-kilometer length for the European capital celebrations. And they had everybody build a whole table. And so neighbors that had been cut apart through the highway on both sides of the street actually had a lunch or dinner, I forget, along this very, very long table. And sometimes to change the imaginaries, what Sarah was also asking before, to change these imaginaries, to have a new vision, you need something with impact to allow you to do it. Hilde, would you like to add something on there?
Yeah, I just shared an article because indeed I think within the Netherlands is a long tradition of floodings and protection against water, and a very strong narrative. We have to protect ourselves against the water, and this also connects to what Karim and Sarah also said earlier. To reframe that is very important, and as we've also talked about in the course, to reimagine a space and come up, instead of negative narratives like this shouldn't happen, it really helps. It's been scientifically proven that it helps. It's better to kind of imagine a new use and empower a group that is within that shares that opinion or shares that imaginary. And to share that is actually a very good way to start a discussion, to mediate these different narratives, and actually go further within new ways and within with reimagining new uses also of, for example, spaces, but also of water. And I think that's so interesting in the topic of water and heritage, that it really is about that border between water and space, how we use it, how we value it. It is a constant discussion, and it's also a discussion on interests of big players and big stakeholders, but also the interests of individuals and smaller groups. That's why it's also interesting, Linda, what you said, that you, I mean, in the Netherlands we have this water board system, and I saw in the course also some other governance systems that specifically aim towards water, but a lot of cities or countries don't have that system, and even when that system is in place, it's far from perfect, because you have to. It's like a normal democracy, right? It really is difficult for individuals or smaller groups to make their point. But it's a very interesting discussion, and I think it's a good point, David, that you raised. Thank you for that. And I think, Christian, you also unmuted yourself for a little bit. I think you also wanted to say something.
Hi, hello everyone. I was taking some medical lessons, so I have to leave this meeting for a few minutes. Well, in the case of Valparaiso City, in rainwater and spring water channels, we have a big challenge here, because of these structures that came from our ravines, because we have a lot of mountains here in the city. We have also a big opportunity, because in the upper lands of our city, we have a lot of illegal housing settlements, illegal garbage settlements, and a lot of problems with the native vegetation of that sites. So managing in a right way all these ravines in terms of creating new public spaces, for example, connected with communities and educate communities to live with that ravines in their natural ways. It's a big opportunity for us, and we have those two options you mentioned, Carola, in the lower lands. That is to keep these channels open, and we know, everyone knows that it's a huge problem to do that today, because they are close with streets, squares, and many other public spaces, or to build, for example, some kind of green areas like parks or squares over it, and take advantage of the water that is running down to irrigate those public spaces or something else. So you have those two options, and we are dealing with that today. We also have developed international competitions. In my material in the course, I upload some images of that competitions. For example, in the Argentina Avenue, that is the main rainwater channel we have in the city. So we are working on that. Our problem also is that that kind of water is ruled by the government for the Public Works Ministry, and the major don't participate in that kind of decisions. And the water, the drinking water is concessions by private. So we have a huge challenge here in our port city, and we also have all that channels. The outlet of that channels are inside the port. So we have dredge problems also for shipping. So it's our problem too. So that's why it's very interesting for us to participate in this course and have all these cases to review these aspects. My English is a little bit rusty, but I don't know if you understand it.
Your English is great, but this is also a good example of how to get buy-in when your stakeholders are not yet there. So if you can somehow, and I think David was making a point in the course, that even if we think the borders of the river are sponge, how do we get social buy-in, kids playing there? So can we kind of different layers of liking this place? So that's why I was thinking when you say there's a specific maybe low settlement or squatters or low level neighborhoods next to the streams, how can you facilitate their use of the river and make them partners in there, or bring new stakeholders in? I think this exchange of stakeholders is what's so tricky. And that I think actually gets us also to thanks, David. Nice comment in the chat. So the final exercise of the course is also in that direction. And I probably shouldn't yet give too much away, but the idea is to activate the knowledge that you have gained to try and change the mind of select stakeholders. And maybe I'll give one more example from the Netherlands, and I think, Linda, you will perhaps also appreciate that. There are a lot of K-walls in the Netherlands. There are hundreds of kilometers, and every city has them. Now, they were built at the time for human use and maybe a few horses, but they were not necessarily built for heavy transport and traffic and trucks. So the underground is still sometimes from the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century, and it now has to carry contemporary weights. So we have to, if you just put in a sign, as Hilda also said before, forbidden, no parking, well, that doesn't solve the solution. So you have to come up with new ideas, competitions, bringing in people who live there to imagine new practices that will, for example, help us maintain these K-walls in novel ways, and to get buy-in from the people so that they're actually willing to clean up these sites. And I believe that the historic urban landscape approach, even if we don't have yet those 100 examples where we can see here is how it worked, can be an opportunity to anchor our waterworks in a larger space, what Christian was also just describing, to get the buy-in of different groups and to visualize this entire system. And with this visualization, then hopefully also make impact towards more actions that can actually help us switch out the various stakeholders. Anyone else has a final comment to give, because we're running out of time? No, Linda or anybody who wants to. Oh, Estefania, sorry, I did not get to you, but I saw you put your note in the chat. You might want to say something about you could probably just, I guess we are right with me, how important the historic urban landscape approach can be for actually making this change.
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me. You could,
yes.
You can listen. Hello, everybody. I'm so sorry that I couldn't follow the course because it seemed really interesting, and the way you have all build the knowledge together and the examples that you post now. My research is connected to how historic urban landscape is able to broaden this perception of heritage values, perhaps because of the social construction of a World Heritage designation doesn't imply water system. But when you go to understand how these heritage values are connected to the history and through time and the development of the city, you realize that you need tools that like the historic urban landscape that will broaden this perception of the relation, for example, with water systems. And the case of Mantovan Savioneta, that is the one that I been researching, is an example of this. You can see, for example, in the Canopy platform, the two examples about this, linking two projects that are Sergio Di Acqua and Pesquería de Giulio Romano, that are bottom-up projects broadening this perception and that are in collaboration with the World Heritage managers. So it is an interesting example. I will put the link in the chat so others in the course could see it.
Yes. Thank you very much. Our hope is that we can build on these courses, the Port one, the Waterworks one, to have teaching really on how to use the historic urban landscape approach in everyday practice. So that's one of the future goals. But before that, we look forward to your final submissions, if those of you who are here, but also those of you who will listen to it later on. And you're all invited to write a blog for our blog series under the blue papers. You've had some of them in the course. So I really think this could be a great way of exchanging knowledge, of building a community of people who want to connect water and heritage, water and history for a more sustainable future. So thanks a lot to all of you, and I hope we will be in touch. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.